sounding like a freak of nature. And so this time around, it's going to be a re-record of the same content, but with a slightly different take on it, where I'm not pounding problem framing into the ground like I did yesterday. So let's try this again. This is an introduction to problem framing for those of you who don't know about it in the Global Virtual Design Sprint. This is a primer on what it's like. So first thing is that problem framing is basically meant to understand, define, and prioritize business problems at a high level. It depends on primarily what your organization or company is thinking about solving or addressing, but it is originated in design thinking. And through a number of activities and sequences, you explore a problem space and figure out what you want to solve for ultimately. So basically, problem framing starts with explaining the problem and stating why it matters. So giving the rationale, the why. Then you get into how things are working currently, like what's going on, what are the current state of affairs, what are users doing, what are they experiencing? And then you get into how things should work in the future. What should be an ideal state for these particular users or customers? And then from there, once you kind of define both of those, both current state and future state, you start ideating for some solutions. Now, you want to consider problem framing when you need to understand what you're solving for. So if you have a lot of different things on the plate that you could put focus on, problem framing definitely helps in focusing on one or two particular aspects. And especially if you're with a team that wants to share their point of view on the subject, they have experience or they have a frame of reference that could really help the team, then you definitely want to use problem framing. It also helps to provide some rationale in terms of strategic mindsets for people that are very strategic mind focused and like to think of things in terms of sequences and long-term planning. Problem framing tends to kind of structure everything so that you have everything laid out and you kind of know which direction to go in. And finally, to understand what your users and customers are going through. So that's not necessarily the business point of view, but you can actually infuse a lot of user-centered approaches to how you're approaching the problem and making sure that's integrated into what you're doing. Now, there's some problems with problem framing that need to be addressed. The first one is that even though you can really feel for your users or your customers, it's really a bad proxy for actual experience. The more you can get closer to people that are subject matter experts or that have lived and breathed what you are currently thinking about and exploring in terms of problems, that's probably the best way. Otherwise, kind of throwing spaghetti at a wall if you don't know what you're supposed to be focused on and you're just kind of using third-party data. So it's great that you care about the people that you want to design for, but you really have to have context. You have to have applied experience, and that's that the inputs really matter in that regard. Plus, you don't want to overdo it. If you do too much problem framing, you try to get so much data into the mix, what you're really doing is you're reinforcing the current status quo. If you're trying to be innovative, look at things outside the box, it's really hard to do that when you know too much. So you want to do just enough to understand the problem space that you're after, but you definitely don't want to go all the way and know everything about it to the point where you're just basically designing in a box or a hypothetical box of expectations around your problem. And then the underlying pain may be more important. So you may be solving for problems that are symptoms of a real pain at the core. And maybe that's already known so that isn't an issue. But you may be just solving one dimension of several that correspond to a more deeper pain that problem framing may not surface. So it bears kind of having that discussion very early on about the why. Is this the right thing to solve for? Now, once you get past kind of the pros and cons and you really want to do problem framing, the way I usually recommend it, and this is what's coming up next week, is that you'll start with a topic. We kind of did a little bit of that with our kickoffs, but in the sync sessions, the preparation sessions that are coming up, everyone will submit a topic of their choice. And sometimes it's going to be what somebody else has as well. But if it's your own unique one, you're going to submit it, put it on the mural, and then everyone takes 20 minutes to research someone else's topic. So not your own, but this is where curiosity kind of comes into play. You kind of pick one that looks interesting and do a Google search, maybe read some articles, maybe a video, but you basically, while you're online, take about 15, 20 minutes to kind of look through and see what you see about that particular topic and get some context, get some understanding. And then once you do that, everyone shares what they found, and eventually you vote on a topic. Typically, you'll have one that stands out. If you have two or three, Then you can have a short discussion on what you want to go forward with, because in the Global Virtual Design Sprint, at least in number 5, for the virtual sprints, the topic is de-emphasized because you're after process and understanding how to do it. Whereas in the dash, it's more emphasized. So you may want to adjust your time appropriately and kind of figure out what you'd like to kind of solve for. In the dash, you could move forward with 2 different topics, but again, it's up to the team and how big your team is and what they'd like to take on. Once you get that topic solidified, you want to explore the problem space. And you do this by asking 3 particular W questions: the what, the who, and the why. You can go when and where, but in my experience, you tend to pigeonhole yourself when you do that, because the kinds of problems that you're talking about for certain users can happen in many different places. So as long as you cover these 3 W's, you should be pretty good at understanding, or at least starting the conversation about what problem to solve for. And then you get into imagining, where once you understand that space, you start getting into current and future space, what people are dealing with and what they could actually experience that's better. And then speculate on how that future state could potentially work. Like, how might we do a particular aspect of the future state? Or how might we solve for X? And those start the conversations for ideation, or set the bed for ideation in a proper fashion. Once you do that, you basically write up your understanding of the problem. So it's summarizing everything that you discussed, your impression of what the topic is. And this is something that outside of your group, somebody would read this and understand what you're basically focused on in terms of like a direction, what you're going to be kind of doing as a team. And it reads in such a way so it tells a story. It takes a little bit of a practice to get it right. And some people are better writers than others, but it's really good when you kind of read it aloud, share with others, so that you can get a sense of what you said is understood by others beyond your team is otherwise. And then you'll know that you're kind of heading in the right direction, or at least starting to tell a compelling story. And just like with the topic, you vote in the problem statement. It doesn't need to be, you can have 2 or 3 of them if you want and Frankenstein them. It's totally up to your team. But you do want to narrow down which particular problem statement seems to be the best, or at least the one that resonates with everyone. Then you can go back to the previous sections of the what, the who, and the why, and the dimensions of current and future state, and see where those connections are to that problem statement. And I think you should be in good shape. If you want to know more about problem framing beyond this short presentation, there are a number of resources you can look at. I wrote an article on simplified problem framing that may be worth your while. There's a Build a Sprint Challenge article that I'll include, where you can do some challenge. And we did this in the kickoff, actually. You can get it done in 10 seconds or less, which is kind of a misnomer because it actually takes about 10 minutes. There is something from Design Sprint. In fact, there's 2 links from Design Sprint Academy. One's how to run a mini problem framing workshop, and the other one is the presentation they did in GVDS 3 on problem framing, so that it's understood from an enterprise level, so you can get a greater understanding of the practice overall. That's it for problem framing. This is the redo from yesterday, and hopefully you'll pardon my introduction at the beginning for not having all my ducks in a row, but it didn't tell me I went live automatically. It's strange. Anyway, hope this is beneficial. Hope you're enjoying your weekend, and we'll see you next week for our prep sessions. Okay, take care. Talk to you later. Adios, and